Hey friends, I want to talk today about a question that I ask all the time, which is, how are you feeling? Or a variant of it. I ask this question almost every day in check-ins at the meetings that I do for the Service Guild. We start all of our meetings with check-ins, with emotional check-ins. And the question is, how are you feeling? What are you coming in with? And I answer this, and whoever I'm on a call with answers this. And that's a context that I ask this question all the time. But I also ask it in all kinds of conversations, sometimes in the middle of a conversation, and I'll come back to that. But the first thing I want to say about it is, even though it's a really simple and straightforward question, it can be really hard for people to answer. And for me, I mean, how are you doing emotionally? What's happening for you emotionally? What is your emotional experience coming into this? And a sort of valid or correct or like meaningful response to that is to answer with an emotion or a series of emotions. And you might also add things like circumstances or some information or a story about what's happening for you. But what I really want to hear is, hey, I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling happy, or confused, afraid, whatever it is. Those are some of the sort of basic colors of the emotional palette, in the same way that like red, green, and blue are the basic colors of the artistic palette for visual art. Happy, sad, angry, afraid are the basic colors. And I want to know, are you happy? Are you sad? Are you afraid? Are you angry? Some mixture of those. And of course you can color it with some more detail. The bioemotive framework, which I have a blog post about from Doug Tasshin and his family, really helped me to have more of an emotional vocabulary. And he talks about those are the emotions, and then there's interpersonal feelings like betrayed or abandoned, or these kind of ED words. They typically end in ED, although not always. Hurt is a good example of an interpersonal feeling that doesn't end with ED. And then there's the core feelings, which are like alone or hopeless or powerless. And of course, those have positive variants as well, like powerful or connected or, important or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be negative. You could be happy and on top of the world in your check-in. But just to give kind of emotional context. And this can be hard for people because of what Doug calls alexithymia, which means not having words for emotions. A lot of people in our culture don't have the vocabulary to describe their emotional reality. They're still experiencing these emotions and feelings, but they don't know. So they'll just say good or bad. Or more often people will tell a story about what they're experiencing, which is fine. There's not a problem with answering, how are you? How are you feeling? What's happening for you with a story? But what I really want to know is, what are you experiencing emotionally? And then the information or story is additional context that's nice to hear, but the core of what I want to hear is, how are you feeling? And that's part of why I'm making this video, because a lot of times people really have a hard time answering this question, and sometimes I'll follow up and be like, okay, great, thanks for sharing that, but can you tell me more about what you're feeling? Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you afraid? Are you angry? And for me, and I think really for many people, if not everyone, knowing someone else's emotional reality, what they're experiencing, helps connect interpersonally, where sharing what you're feeling and hearing what someone else is feeling, there's a kind of like synchronization that happens where you meet each other where you are. And so even though, for example, on a Zoom call, you're coming from physically different places, maybe you're in different time zones, and you're also coming from different places emotionally, energetically in your day, you can kind of synchronize and be like, okay, this person's having this kind of day, having these kinds of feelings, here's where I'm coming from, and we can meet each other there. And sometimes that means adapting, like, hey, do you still want to have the call now? Or do you need something different than what we'd planned for today? I want to advocate for something different. Do we want to change this meeting or this conversation in some way to match our emotional reality. And often if part of my insistence on doing check-ins comes from having had a lot of bad meetings in the past where one of, not the only, but one of the root causes typically was that someone, maybe me, maybe someone else, maybe multiple people in a meeting had some kind of emotional reality that was present for them and strong, but not being recognized explicitly or not being acknowledged or adapted to. Just to give a simple fictional example, like say you're having a budget meeting in a nonprofit and it's really important that you balance the budget, but someone's really sad about a breakup that they had or really angry about a conversation that they had earlier in the day. That's felt by everybody in the room and is going to affect the experience of having that conversation. And if you meet that person where they are and adjust to where they are, then it's much more likely that you're going to have a fruitful conversation if everybody's emotional reality is acknowledged and met and adapted to. And sometimes that means not having that conversation under that circumstances. You kind of have to make a collective call. But if you're overriding someone's individual experience, the collective conversation is not going to go well. So from a leadership, organization, group perspective, that's part of why I value this. I also really just value as a friend. A big part of the Service Guild is collaborating with friends. Everyone in the Service Guild is a friend of mine. We're doing fun service projects together as friends, as an activity that we like to do. And I really care what my friends are feeling. And this comes back to what I said earlier about sort of variants of this question. And so say I have a phone call with a friend, which I do all the time, or a Zoom call or whatever, and they say something that's important and that means something to me or I'm curious about. A question I'll ask sometimes is like, and how do you feel now, having said all that? Or what does thinking about this make you feel? Or how did you feel when they said that? Or how did you feel when they did that? And that's the same question, but with a little bit more context and specificity. And that's such a powerful question. I can't tell you how many times people will say, wow, what a really good question. I appreciate you asking that. And I like to joke that this is really the only question that I ask my friends is like, and how are you feeling? But if you ask that question in context, when someone says something important and vulnerable, how do you feel now that you said that? How do you feel thinking about this? How does this make you feel? How did you feel when they did that? How did you feel when that happened? That's almost always a very powerful question at the right moment that gives someone an opportunity to reflect and to integrate what their experience is, and it gives you meaningful information often if it's a relational context. So it's just such a powerful question. How are you feeling? And really listening to what people have to say, really sharing what you have to say about your own experience is really important. And it matters to me that people know how to answer this question well, that they share an emotion in response to it. To give a specific analogy that will only resonate for some people, but I just mention it in case it does, it's a little bit like programming in a language with types, which I've not done, but I know about. And, in a programming language with types, for example, a specific function might say, hey, I need a number as an input to this function, and I'm going to output a string or something like that. And so when I ask you, how are you feeling? I want to hear an emotion or a set of emotions or some kind of emotional experience. And I might also hear a story or a concept or just good or bad or something. But I want to hear something like happy, sad, angry, afraid, maybe a more specific feeling, maybe a suite of feelings. You can get quite textured with your answer to this. But that's kind of what I want to hear. It's really funny, actually, now that I think about it, because in the love department of the Service Guild, the people who are like love people often have the most involved check-ins. They have a lot of knowledge of their heart and what they're feeling. And sometimes people in the love department really need like 5 or 10 minutes to fully check in. Like, hey, this is what I'm feeling and what I'm bringing into this call. But of course it can be very simple and just be a sentence even, like, yeah, I feel happy and sad, or, happy about this, sad about that, afraid about this, whatever. I think there's a little bit of a skill to answering this question concisely and briefly if that's what's called for and appropriate. There's a question to answering it elaborately and really going into a lot of detail and sharing it. And you have to know which of those is called for, what the context is, and so on. But in any case, I think it's worth reflecting on how to answer this question. How are you feeling? And noticing when it's a really powerful question to ask. I think it's actually a really underrated question to ask at just the right moment. So those are some thoughts about the question. How are you feeling?